That's probably what I'll do too. I was thinking about 45 minutes. We'll kind of see how long it goes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Good news is we're live, so we'll just let people catch on. So
nice.
Looks like we're live on all of them. Trying to add a new banner to this thing. Bear with me. There we go. I don't know. It looks like we're on the Clemson page, but I know we're on all of them. So at least that's what I'm seeing. Do you see the Clemson page also?
Yeah, I see the Clemson page, but as long as we're on all of them, I think that's just fine.
Yeah, I think we're good. All right, we can get this thing started. We got a few people listening and checking us out. So good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Van Wagner with ESPN Blacksburg, joined today McDaniel of Sports Illustrated. ACC Kickoff going on in Charlotte. Lots to talk about. It looks like we are on every page we are supposed to be on. So hopefully we're good. Mike and I only see the Clemson banner, so hopefully we're on all of them. If not, tell your friends to check out the Clemson page because that's where we're at today, talking all things ACC. Mikey, how are you, man?
Good. It's hard to believe that football's back because that's basically what ACC Kickoff means, right? We're back. Yeah. Media day, everybody flocking to Charlotte, so hard to believe. Fall camp is upon us.
6 Saturdays till we kick off ACC. So if you have any vacation plans between now and September 1st, might want to get those taken care of because once September 1st rolls around, I don't know, do we have any ACC teams playing in week 0, Mike?
Oh.
I think Notre Dame plays Navy, but neither of those are technically ACC schools.
Yeah, I actually got to check out the week 0 schedule, to be honest with you. Let's take a look.
So while Mike's looking at that, lots of interesting stuff going on at ACC Kickoff this week. A lot of coaches giving us real sound clips and a lot of coaches giving us coach speak. Georgia Tech's head coach basically said he doesn't even know who the starting quarterback is, Mike. So let's start there. Let's start with the rambling wreck from Georgia Tech. If you're a Georgia Tech fan, can you honestly even expect anything this year? Like, I mean, if you pick up some non-conference wins, you got to be happy with where that program is. I mean, that's a complete and total second time around rebuild, isn't it?
Yeah. I think people around Georgia Tech feel like the team can be better than I think what a lot of people expect them to be. It was just so bad under Jeff Collins. I think the expectation is like anything could be better, right? Which I think Virginia Tech fans could relate to a little bit with Fuente, right? Because it was just kind of stuck in neutral. And then it was pretty clear, like he left, the talent left, and then Brent Pry was basically building from like a zero building block, right? I mean, it was not much left over. Georgia Tech, I think they feel like they do have some talent returning, and now with Collins kind of completely out of the fold, but you still have Brent Key, as part of the program, a guy who was on Jeff Collins' staff, who's still there. He's kind of a holdover, but he's a new voice, and the team is definitely, I think, more receptive to him. I do think Georgia Tech feels like, things will be better this fall than it was last fall. I don't know. It's tough because, you see kind of the issues that they've had, kind of across the roster. And it's really hard to imagine that, Brent Key, just like a change of a coach right away, is going to flip that switch. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do at quarterback, right? Haynes King from Texas A&M is a guy who's obviously in the mix. Zach Pyron as well, who was a backup to Jeff Sims last year.
Right.
Quarterback is really going to be crucial in kind of what they choose to do there. But I think that, when evaluating Georgia Tech, you do understand that, you're removed from Collins and you have Brent Key and you have this runway and you have this momentum around the program, but it might not mean wins right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might take a little time. And I think Georgia Tech definitely has some momentum on the recruiting trail. I think they're definitely recruiting well under Key. I do think there's just a more positive vibe, positive energy around the football program, much like what Virginia Tech dealt with a year ago, right? But that doesn't mean you're going to have all these wins kind of pile up right away. You look at their schedule, and it's not the easiest schedule in the world. Like you miss Florida State, but you draw Clemson on the road. You still have to play Georgia at the end of the year in your rivalry game. So that's two losses on the schedule already. You play Louisville in a non-conference game at the beginning of a neutral site game at the beginning of the year in Atlanta. And that's going to be a really pivotal game because Louisville is got a new coach, right? It's kind of the same deal. They have Jeff Brom coming in. There's a lot of questions. They're replacing a quarterback too. I think if you're Georgia Tech and you're going to try to make a bowl game, like you got to win that game in the opener. It's just that there aren't a ton of guaranteed wins on the schedule. It's a lot of toss-up games. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how they shake out because the schedule doesn't really do them any favors, but I do feel like there are so many teams in the ACC that are kind of in this transition stage that I think Georgia Tech's among those teams. And I think that, somebody out of that pack needs to emerge to become a bowl team, right? And Georgia Tech with positive momentum and, if they get the quarterback position figured out, maybe they're one of those teams.
You look at the Georgia Tech schedule, and I mean, there are some winnable games on there depending on, they're not quite in the same boat as Boston College and Virginia Tech, but you're going to play a Louisville team that we don't know a whole lot about. You're going to play South Carolina State. Ole Miss obviously is going to be a tough road to hoe. You have Bowling Green there. You have Boston College. You have Virginia. Other than that, the schedule is kind of daunting. But again, if everything goes right for Georgia Tech, like potentially they could end up winning enough games to make a bowl. And I think, even if you're a Georgia Tech fan and you don't make a bowl, right? Like anything that you see positive from the previous regime is got to be good.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned this kind of off the top, and I think what's tough about Georgia Tech is they're in like the second iteration of a rebuild, right? So the Jeff Collins era was supposed to be not necessarily a rebuild because I think Paul Johnson definitely had the program humming, but it was going to be different, right? And it was kind of a rebuild in that, you're moving away from this option offense and you're going to, have this more modern offensive game under Jeff Collins. Right. And it was kind of a rebuild from the standpoint of, you had to recruit actual offensive linemen. Like, no offense to Georgia Tech option offensive linemen, because they were very good at running the option, but it's a different kind of athlete you're recruiting now, right? And Georgia Tech kind of went through their own little mini rebuild just from a personnel standpoint offensively. So that didn't really work out, and it was stuck not only in neutral, but in reverse, especially last year and a half or so. And they pulled the plug and kind of, there were a lot of names being thrown around as to, who was going to replace Jeff Collins. And it just kind of ends up being Brent Key, who was the interim. And do I think it's the worst move in the world? No. I think, when Jeff Collins came in, I think there was a lot of hope, coming off of his tenure at Temple. I think there was a lot of hope that he was going to be a guy who could bring a toughness and a defensive minded, team. And they just never really were able to build on that identity because the offense was so bad, right? Yeah. The offense was bad. The defense was okay. They weren't terrible, but Collins made his name at Temple for having a really good defense, and it never really panned out Georgia Tech because they never got the offensive side of the football figured out. Was he dealt a bad hand? Yeah, kind of, because you're walking into an option scheme, but also that going into that job that you're going to have to completely overhaul the offense. And he just never got the staff in to do it, and he really never got the personnel in to do it. He had Jeff Sims, and he had Jahmyr Gibbs, who obviously went on to Alabama and was drafted pretty high in the NFL draft.
Lions fan.
he's going to be a very good player, but it's not like they couldn't recruit. Like Collins was recruiting okay, he just couldn't really get the most out of the roster he had.
Well, and I think trying to turn over that offensive line, right? Like that was an undersized offensive line that did everything by cut blocks, right? Like I think everybody in the ACC will tell you, man, the worst thing in the world for your defensive line was playing Georgia Tech because dudes were going to get their knees taken out. And I think that's the issue. You have undersized offensive line. They don't really pass block. I mean, not that they couldn't, but it wasn't something that they did. You had a quarterback that was essentially a running back. I mean, they're like, go back to the first couple of years, like there was some really bad quarterback play at Georgia Tech, and no fault of the kids. Like they were essentially running backs just running a triple option. Like it's really hard to make that transition. And, defensively, they always seem to be pretty solid. They just could never get the offense going. I want to switch gears because Jimmy actually posted something in the chat, and I actually disagree with that statement, Mike, that the ACC seems down this year. I was going to do this at the end, but since Jimmy decided to chime in, I think maybe now is a good time. I made the argument today on the drive. By the way, you can hear me on ESPN Blacksburg Monday through Friday from 4 to 6. We are a sports talk show. We kind of go off the rails a lot. But today we were talking about, how close is the ACC to being that third tier Power 5 school and kind of trying to make that step. Are you going to ever compete with the Big Ten or the SEC? And I said, yeah, I think they will. Like if you look at the other conferences, right, specifically the Big 12 and the Pac-12, there are maybe 5 schools in each of those conferences, right, that are legitimate contenders to be a top 25 school. Are they all going to be? No, but there are 5. If you look at the ACC, right, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, Duke is on the comeuppance right now, right? So there's 5 right there before we even really start diving into the schools that are starting to trend in the right direction. You can put Virginia Tech in that group. You can put NC State in that group. Wake Forest seems to be going in the right direction, right? So like there's 8 right there. Now, do all 8 become relevant? Maybe, maybe not, but like the 5 from the Big 12 and the 5 from the Pac-12 are going to be the same 5 that they've been for my entire life, right? Essentially. So as far as the ACC is concerned, I think they're a lot closer to being that third team. If you look at the SEC, there's like 10. Like you're not going to compete with the SEC. Even the Big 10, like I can make an argument that there's only 5 there, right? You got Michigan, you got Ohio State, you got Penn State. You've got Wisconsin, and then maybe one more, right? Maybe it's Iowa, maybe it's Nebraska. I don't know, but like there's
a lot
of
rebuilding schools.
Yeah, exactly.
Rebuilding programs.
I mean, nobody's going to make an argument that Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, maybe Iowa, but probably not. Purdue's on the downward trend. Lord only knows what's going to happen with Northwestern. Jesus, They might get the death penalty if things continue to play out the way they currently are, right? So. I would make the argument that the ACC isn't down. The ACC is trending upwards, and the teams just need to kind of keep churning what they're churning, and easily we can see 7 legitimate teams out of the ACC.
I think the ACC is a lot closer to being the Big Ten or the SEC than it is like the Big 12 or the Pac-12. Yep. Reason why I say that is I think for this season in particular, I think it's a little top heavy, right? Mm-hmm. Clemson and Florida State, I think, are 2 bona fide playoff contenders, right? And I think one of them will eventually make the playoff, and it'll be whoever comes out of the ACC, because I think that those 2 are on a collision course to make the ACC championship game, and we'll see kind of how that all shakes out. Florida State, obviously, with Jordan Travis and the way, that offense looked last year and take another step forward. You have another good recruiting class. You still have Johnny Wilson on the outside, a receiver. Travis is a Heisman candidate quarterback. They return a really good defense. Like, this is a Florida State team that definitely has a chance to be a top 4 or 5 team in the country 100%. All year long. Yep. Florida State draws Clemson on September 23rd in Death Valley. That's one of 2 times they'll play this year because I fully expect them to play again at the end of the year. What will be interesting is if, obviously one of those teams is going to lose in September, but if both teams win out the rest of the way, and the team that lost in September then wins in the ACC championship game, what do you do? They both have one loss. You have obviously the ACC champion would have the inside track to a college football playoff. But is that going to be an undefeated team? If it's an undefeated team, it's a no-brainer, right? If it's a one-loss team, that lost to, that team they just played in the conference championship earlier in the season, do you try to get both in? Like, how does that work? So I don't think the
ACC, yes.
Right. When they go to 8, yes. When they with the 4-team playoff, probably not. There's too much. There's too many good teams. USC really good in the Pac-12. Utah returns a really good team with Cam Rising at quarterback. So the Pac-12 is going to have their say. The Big Ten, obviously, they have Ohio State. You have Michigan. They have a great chance to get two teams.
Penn State can shock some people.
Penn State should be pretty
10
good.
10 teams in the SEC.
Right. Georgia's the bona fide national championship favorite again. Right. Alabama is not going away. So I just think there's too many good teams to get 2 teams in from the ACC, but it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out with Florida State and Clemson. But getting back to what you were talking about, I think who's the third best team in the ACC, I think is a question we're going to be asking ourselves all year long. Yeah. Is it North Carolina? Obviously with what they have at quarterback with Drake May. Is it an NC State that has Brennan Armstrong coming in at quarterback, who's obviously been really good with Robert Anae, the offensive coordinator, who's coming down from Syracuse, used to be the offensive coordinator for Brennan Armstrong at UVA. That offense should be really good. They have a good defense, a really good team returning. NC State has an opportunity to be a third best team. Is Miami going to take a step forward with Cristobal? There are so many teams that I feel like have definitely some question marks, right? On one side of the ball or the other, maybe don't have everything figured out. But if they do answer some of those lingering questions, I think this is going to be a very competitive middle of the conference this year, which kind of spoke to our Georgia Tech point earlier, where somebody's got to emerge out of that pack to be like the third or fourth best team in the ACC, and who's that going to be?
Well, and I guess to your point, all of those teams that I listed, right? Clemson plays Duke, Clemson plays Florida State, Clemson plays Syracuse. Maybe it's Syracuse with that running game. Clemson plays Miami, NC State, and North Carolina this year, all on the schedule. So if you're good enough to beat Clemson somewhere along that path, maybe you are that bona fide number 2. I think all of these teams, though, that are potentially that 2, that 3, right? Maybe even that 4, like Clemson is going to get their best shot, regardless of if it's in Death Valley or on the road. Clemson is just that team, right? They're going to get the best shot. So we'll know probably by the midway point if A, Clemson is for real, which I believe that they will be, and B, who the other for real teams are, because maybe you lose to Clemson, but if you keep that game close,
right,
maybe you are a legit contender, and maybe going into the ACC championship, you have an opportunity to do something against Clemson.
And Clemson's not without questions either, right? Like, is Cade Klubnik going to be the quarterback everybody expected him to be now that he has Garrett Riley coming in as offensive coordinator, who obviously helped TCU make a national championship appearance last year? Like, is Klubnik going to be that bona fide 5-star quarterback that everybody expected him to be? The guy who is going to push DJU to the brink and obviously push him out to Oregon State, right? He's going to take over a starting quarterback job full time. Is he going to be that really good quarterback everybody was expecting him to be? Is Clemson's offense going to look a lot better now that Garrett Riley's in? They have a better scheme on that side of the football. That's a change that a lot of people didn't expect Dabo Swinney to make. I think going into the year, Florida State's the team that doesn't have any questions. They don't have any questions. Relative to, the way the ACC's looked the past decade, it's been really Clemson, right? Since 2014, 2015, right after Florida State won their last national championship, the questions have been about everybody except for Clemson. And now I think Clemson still doesn't have a lot of questions compared to the rest of the conference, but they do have some that they need to answer. And now I think Florida State with a really good quarterback, and Norvell, who, had a little rocky start to the rebuild, but really got the thing humming again. He's doing great on the recruiting trail. He obviously has them well coached. We saw what they were able to do last year. You kind of saw the beginnings of this a couple seasons ago, that they were starting to win games, pick some games off that they probably shouldn't have. And you saw him kind of laying the groundwork, and now it's here. And I think it's all kind of building up to this iteration of Florida State with Jordan Travis, veteran leader, his last year in the program, like this is what they've been building for.
Yep.
And they have the recruiting now going on, behind these starters that are supposed to be very good. And Florida State's going to be good for a while now, I think. But this is a really big year for the Seminoles. And I think the question is, can they take it to the next level, right? Can they get over that hump? Can they beat Clemson? Can they win ACC championship? Can they get to a college football playoff? Like those are the questions coming into the year in the ACC.
So originally I had planned on us just going through each team individually, but you all are asking a lot of great questions, making a lot of great points. So I'm gonna call an audible here, and we're gonna let you all kind of control the show, and Mike and I will just talk about the things that you want us to talk about. I think we've addressed this one from Workforce. I believe Florida State takes a step forward. I think that, like you said, Mike, all of the pieces are there, right? Like it just becomes a case of, can the coaches bring this team together, right? I use the term the inmates running the asylum. That can't happen at Florida State. Like these kids have to have direction. They have to have guidance. They have to have leadership. If they have that, I believe that Florida State takes that next step forward and continues to be what could be, I guess I'll rephrase that. Florida State becomes the team that everybody thought they would be when they joined the ACC, how many ever years ago that was.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I keep going back to Jordan Travis, but like if he stays healthy, I don't see how they're not the team a lot of people expect them to be. And I think the down year for Florida State, or like the regression, right, in this case would be like 10-2, 9-3, like not quite achieving what everybody's expecting him to, but still being a pretty good team and a team that you see that's kind of on the ascent. I think it would be a bummer for Florida State fans if they were just kind of stuck in neutral this year and they finished the year like 9-3, 10-2. Would it be stuck in neutral relative to where they were a few years ago? Absolutely not. It would be stuck in neutral relative to what the expectations are, which are extremely high.
And the thing that people need to remember too, and if you go look at it, I don't remember the exact numbers. I ran this on the drive a couple of weeks ago. If you go look at all of college football, right, like 122 Division I college football programs, right? I want to say it's something like 38 ended up with 9 wins or more. Maybe it was 48. And then to get to the 10-win plateau, you get into the 20s, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you're winning 9 or 10 games a year, you are an elite program, right? Like, are you making the national championship tournament? No, maybe not. But I'm going to tell you right now, there's 100 schools behind you that would be damn happy to win 9 games. And so, like, you got to kind of consider that too when you look at like how good is my school. Trust me, as Virginia Tech guys, we would kill for 9 wins.
Yeah, no, we're far removed from the consecutive the 10-win season streak that they had for so long.
Yeah. Workforce says sleeper in the ACC, Miami or Louisville. I don't think Miami's a sleeper, Mike. This is a program that continues to recruit at an extremely high level. Again, inmates running the asylum, right? Coaches need to take control of this thing. Kids got to be accountable for actions and what they do on and off the field. Miami has talent, man. There is a ton of talent in Coral Gables, Florida. Y'all just got to harness that and figure it out. Louisville, they potentially could be a sleeper. I don't know. There's a lot of institutional issues with Louisville. Do they capture lightning in a bottle like they did a couple of years ago with Lamar Jackson? That dude's a transcendent talent. I don't know about Louisville, but I'm going to tell you right now, I don't consider Miami a sleeper. I consider Miami one of the 4.
Yeah, I think they're definitely one of the 4 best teams. It's a matter of, is Tyler Van Dyke going to return and be like the healthy Tyler Van Dyke we saw as a freshman? Because if he's that quarterback, I think that, Cristobal is in good shape there. They're recruiting well. They're going to have a competitive roster. They always do.
Right.
It's just a matter of kind of instilling that culture, right? Which has been a big thing at Cristobal. Why he was brought in is to kind of have a better culture at Miami. I think Manny Diaz in a lot of ways, and Miami fans probably going to disagree with me on this a little bit, but I think he got a raw deal a little bit because I think there were some signs there, especially in his last season, that Miami was taking some strides forward, and it was just going to take a little bit of time. But when you have a chance to go get Cristobal, who's a top 10 coach in the sport, it's his alma mater, you make that move, you pull the trigger. I get why they did that, but it takes a season or two to get, your people in, right? From a staff standpoint, from a transfer portal standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint. There's definitely some talent. I think Miami is going to be definitely improved. Will they be a team that like competes with Florida State or Clemson? I don't think so, but I think they're going to be in kind of that next tier of teams that definitely can make a bowl game. 8 wins, 8, 9 wins, probably not out of the question. The talent's there to make it happen. It's just a matter of, do they put it together this year? Or does it take another year or two?
Yeah. Question coming in from Jackson. Who do we think will be the surprise team in the ACC this year? I'm looking. Mike, go ahead. Get this started. I'm kind of trying to figure that out right now.
I think a lot of people are down on Pittsburgh, and I'm not really totally sure why. Like,
Yeah.
they're replacing a quarterback, right? Keaton Slovis wasn't great last year. They don't, obviously, they're now 2 full seasons removed from Kenny Pickett. Like, what does the offense look like? But all I see Pat Narduzzi do now is win 7 or 8 games a year. Like, that's what he's been doing now consistently for the last few years.
Right.
And the question when he first took over at Pittsburgh was, okay, when is that Michigan State defense going to show up? Right? Because that's what he was known for, a defense coordinator. They're wreaking havoc. They fielded a bunch of really good units. I just think that the defense now has a track record just being really, really solid. And I think the offense has always been a little underrated. They've been running the football really well. Do they have some pieces they have to replace? Yes. Like Izzy Abanikanda's gone. He's a big part of their offense. He's gone at running back. You're now 2 seasons removed from Jordan Addison. You're still trying to figure out ways to replace him. But Pittsburgh recruits at a good level. They have a quarterback now coming in Phil Dracovic, who has shown signs of being good, right? He was good a few years ago at BC. Then he battled some injuries and some inconsistency, but he's now moving back close to home. He's from the Pittsburgh area. He's now playing for kind of his hometown team for Pat Narduzzi. I think this will be a good move to bring him in. And I think Pittsburgh will be able to be one of those teams that's going to be 7 or 8 wins, could absolutely be the 3rd best team in the ACC, in my opinion, just because of the way they play defense and how they've historically now been able to run the football for a few years running. I think that's going to continue even without Abanikanda in the fold.
Yeah. I can't lie to you. I actually had Pittsburgh as my team also, but I think I could make an argument also for NC State, right? Like, I mean, again, health becomes a concern. You know, Brennan Armstrong is going to be the starting quarterback, and for us Virginia Tech fans, we know Brennan Armstrong can play football. Like, he's going to run, he's going to make things real difficult on defenses. You know, they have a decent running game. They usually do. Their wide receivers are not terrible. Their tight ends are good. Like, this offense for NC State could be pretty decent this year with Brennan Armstrong at the helm. And I think, you know, if he can get a little bit of help, NC State could be that sleeper team. You know, we were talking about that top 4, right? Like, I would say NC State, you could see them in that top 4. I really, truly believe that that's a program that is really, really trending in the right direction. And it's been going slowly, right? And by the way, also, shout out to the NC State fans. You all can tailgate like it's nobody's business. Like, yeah, the people of Raleigh know how to tailgate. Hell, they tailgate for Carolina Hurricanes games. So, like, mad props to the people of NC State for the tailgates.
Yeah, for sure. And then, you know, you got Robert and I coming in as the OC to unite with Brennan Armstrong again. Like, there's a lot of good. They got some good stuff going there.
Yeah, I agree. Do we think Duke can repeat what they did last season? Short answer, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Elko can coach. He's always been a good defensive coach, and he came in, and I think the big difference between Duke and Virginia Tech, right, 2 teams in a rebuild, is Duke had a quarterback. Yeah. Duke found one. Riley Leonard can run. Yeah, he's real. He can run. He can throw. He's efficient. He doesn't turn the ball over. Doesn't make a bunch of mistakes. Has total control of the offense. The defense under Elko, like, all you had to do in year 1 under Mike Elko defensively is just hold it together a little bit as you kind of implement your scheme, right? Yep. That's what Brent Pry was hoping for at Virginia Tech. Just hold it together as I implement the scheme. The problem is Virginia Tech didn't have the offense. Duke had an offense, right, to give their defense some time off the field to figure things out in game, and then to kind of get their feet under them a little bit. offensively, Duke was really good last year, and Riley Leonard was a big reason why. I think they're real. I think they're a bowl team. I have no doubt about that. Could I see them maybe not be quite as good as a year ago? Sure, because I think a couple of wins they maybe lucked into a little bit, but that is a good football team. They're well coached. They're not going to give the ball away. Duke's going to be really annoying to play against this year, even though they don't have the talent that some of the other ACC teams do.
But, you look at the wide receiving crew, right? Calhoun, Moore, Haggins, all coming back for Duke this upcoming season, I believe.
Calhoun's
if I'm wrong, somebody please correct me. But, yeah,
Calhoun's
like that's a trio. If I'm a DC or a secondaries coach in the ACC, nah, man, I don't want to face those dudes because those dudes can play football.
Yeah, no, Duke's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about the Hokies. For full disclosure, Mike and I, both Virginia Tech guys. I host The Drive on ESPN in Blacksburg, Virginia. Mike is an alum of Virginia Tech, so don't get too yelly at us here if we start waving the flag of the Hokies. But this is a program, Mike, that I feel like they are trending in the right direction. Are they at a level of those, top 5 schools that we talked about? No, not even close. But I think that they are on their way to getting to that level, right? They, not this year, but in the near future, they could be the 6th team without a problem at all.
Yeah, I think they're probably a year or two from being like that 8, 9, 10 win expectation coming into the year. Maybe not 10, but like at least 7, 8, 9 wins. I think they're still probably a year or two away from that. A lot of fans, I think, are high on Virginia Tech coming into the year because of the turnover they had on offense in terms of like who they're bringing in rather than who's going out the door. Allie Jennings transferring from ODU is a big get. Jalen Lane at wide receiver transferring in, a big get. Bayshell Tootin at running back, a big get. But there's still a lot of questions, right? Especially on the offensive side of the football. Quarterback. Everybody's expecting an improvement because Grant Wells had a good spring game. Spring game doesn't matter. Spring game does not matter. Do I think he'll be improved from a year ago if he ends up being the starting quarterback? I do, because I think the personnel around him is going to be better. Yeah. But what's that ceiling? He's always been a high turnover guy. He's always battled some inconsistency. What's his actual ceiling, right, is kind of the question there. And then offensive line, we just found out today, ACC Media Day, Jesse Hansen's going to be done for the year. And they had questions. He was supposed to be one of the guys to kind of hold the offensive line together. Yep. And he's out the door. And Tech is thin on the offensive line in terms of proven guys. And that was an issue last year. It's still an issue this year. And when you have issues on the offensive line and you don't feel great coming into the year about quarterback, I think you do have a defined ceiling. I do think the offense will be better, Paul. I think the defense, I think, is going to be pretty good. I think the problem the defense is going to run into is if the offense is as bad as it was a year ago, again, which I don't expect it to be quite that bad, but I think they are going to have some growing pains. The defense probably is not going to reach the ceiling that I think it can reach, just because I think they're going to be on the field a lot, especially, game 6, game 7, game 8. So do I think Virginia Tech could make a bowl game? I do. Do I think they will? I'm not 100% there. I think this is truthfully, I think the floor of this team is probably around 4 wins. Mm-hmm. I think they could get to 6, maybe 7, but I think that 5 and 7 record is kind of where I see them. I think
I was gonna say, full disclosure, right? 5 wins is an improvement. So we're talking incremental steps. And I've said this several times on my show that, I would rather have a coach win 3, 5, 6, 7, 9
Norvell
than have what Justin Fuente did, come in and win 10, 9, 7, 6. We're not making a bowl game.
Do the Mike Norvell rebuild. Win a few, then make a bowl game, then win 8, then now you're a playoff contender. That's a progression, right? That you want to have versus what you just said with Fuente, which is 100% true. It slid quickly.
Let's see here. We got some more questions from people. Will Syracuse have another collapse after they play Clemson? I just looked at Syracuse roster. I was actually very bullish on Syracuse, but I hadn't looked at their roster. A lot of questions. A lot of questions for Syracuse, Mike. You know, what does the quarterback play look like? It doesn't look like they have their All-American running back from last year back.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
this,
Tucker's gone. Yep.
yeah. This is a team that.
So Garrett Schrader's back, but you lose Robert and I after one season. Now the good news is Jason Beck was a co-OC last year. He steps into more of a full-time role, but Syracuse was in the Pinstripe Bowl a year ago, right? And Jason Beck, that was his first opportunity to be the full-time OC in the bowl game. Garrett Schrader threw the ball 51 times in that game, Paul. That was 15 more than his career high. Yeah. If that's what we're going to do, I'm not sure I'm so high on Syracuse. I don't think Garrett Schrader's the type of quarterback who should be throwing the ball 51 times. I think Garrett Schrader is effective. I think he's efficient. I think he's a good runner. I think you have to utilize all those skill sets, right? I don't think just flat out air raid with Garrett Schrader is the way to go. Now, fully acknowledging that you don't have Sean Tucker to hand the ball to anymore, right? So I understand that you got to play to your personnel. If you feel like things are better at receiver and tight end, especially with Aronde Gadsden, a really good tight end, an All-American type tight end, you're going to want to, pepper him with targets. I understand that. But yeah, it's going to be a team in transition. Tony White is gone as the defensive coordinator, but Rocky Long's coming in. He's the grandfather basically of the 3-3-5 defense. So I don't expect Syracuse to really take any steps back there. They're playing the same scheme with a guy who's pretty much like, I don't want to call the inventor, but he's like the guy who's made it like a really well-known defense across college football. You have him running the scheme. So I think the defense will be good. It's all about offense for Syracuse. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I think Syracuse will be competitive. I don't think their schedule is set up quite like it was last year, where they had like a bunch of really winnable games up until like the third week of October. And then they had like a bunch of really tough games the second half of the schedule. It's just not laid out like that. So I think they'll be a little bit better than they were last year in terms of like what this question was, where the reason why they had the collapse after Clemson is because the schedule just got brutal on them.
Right. Well, and they do have LaQuint Allen, the running back. He was the guy that was playing behind Sean Tucker last year. 41 carries, 274 yards, 6.7 average, Mike. So, maybe possibly he was a freshman last year. He steps in as a sophomore this year. Maybe you don't miss a beat in the running game. And if that's the case, if that is the case, then good on Syracuse. They can actually probably win some games. To your point on their schedule, Colgate, Western Michigan, at Purdue. Purdue's not the same team they were last year. You play Army. You have Boston College. You have Georgia Tech. You have Wake Forest. You have Virginia Tech on the schedule. Those are all winnable games. Now, you do have Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State, and Pitt. So, I guess, the point is there are games that Syracuse can win. The question is, do they win those games?
Yeah, I mean that's if they do kind of what they did last year, where they steal a couple, right? Like they beat Louisville in the opener, a game that they could have easily lost. Like you got to steal a few, right? I think they'll be in position once again to do that, but whether or not they do that is a whole different matter.
Who will dominate the conference and why will it be Miami? We kind of already addressed this. Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina. Those are kind of my top four. How they shake out will depend on what they do on the field. Are your top four the same, Mike, or do you have somebody else in there?
I'm not really buying Carolina outside of Drake May. Now,
really?
I think they have like a really high floor, but like I think they could win 6 or 7 with like all hell breaking loose.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, their defense hasn't been good now for a number of years. I don't know.
Hold up. I'm going to address all these things. Big Drake May guy, right? Like,
yeah.
I think that Drake May is the real deal. They've got a lot of talent around him. They've recruited amazingly. A lot of changes on the defensive coaching staff. I think that has been their issue on defense is like, Dre Bly was a hell of a recruiter, but Dre Bly couldn't coach his way out of a wet paper bag. Now he's with my Lions, and I'm scared to death. Hopefully he's better at the NFL level than he was at the college level.
Yeah.
But, I really truly believe that North Carolina is going to be, you talk about the sleeper team. I don't know if sleeper is the right term for North Carolina, but I think North Carolina shocks Clemson or Florida State and Miami when they play against them. If they play against Miami, I'm not 100% sure they do. But like if they play those three teams, they're going to shock two of those three teams. I really believe in North Carolina. And I know we have Ryan says that they could be a big flop. I don't know, man. If Carolina has a big flop, I think it's time for a change at the top.
I agree. Well, that I agree with.
Yeah.
They're too talented and they're recruiting too well to just kind of remain stagnant and be this like 7 or 8 win team. I thought it was pretty unfair a couple of years ago, coming off the COVID year, for the expectations to be put on them that they were going to be like a playoff team. Was like some of the preseason predictions were like they were going to be that good, and they had too many questions around Sam Howell. Like they had questions at receiver. They had Ty Chandler coming in at running back, who's a transfer, which Ty Chandler was a good player for them, and he was a good player at Tennessee. But like he was coming in and he was a transfer, and that's not always like something that is going to be like a no-brainer, like just plug and play. And the offense kind of sputtered a little bit. Obviously, they lose in Blacksburg in the opener, but like after that, they just kind of sputtered offensively. They figured it out. But I think what you see with Drake May now on the offensive side, what you saw last year, like he's the real deal. The offense around him is going to be good. My questions are just with the defense. It's not a talent thing. They're recruiting fine. They just haven't been able to really get the most out of the guys that they've been recruiting, especially on the defensive side of the football. So I think expectations are a little bit more tempered for Carolina now. And Paul, to your point, I think maybe it's fair to expect a Carolina team to like meet the expectations that are there for them now, right? And maybe exceed them. Right. But I think they started out with Mac Brown. They started out so high, and people wanted Mac Brown to kind of return, because everybody loves Mac Brown. He's good with the media, and he's a nice guy. He's a good, seems like a good person. Everybody likes Mac Brown, and he had a lot of friends in media from his time at ESPN, and they were pumping Carolina up a couple years ago, and then they flopped. And they didn't necessarily flop last year. In fact, I don't think they got enough hype going into the year last year. Yep. But now they're kind of that forgotten team. They have Drake May, and everybody talks about Drake May, but it's about the defense, and it's been about the defense. Right. And I think if the defense shows up and improves, and the coaching staff turnover ends up being something that's a net positive for them, I think it'll be fine. They could be the third best team in the ACC.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kareem, go ahead, ask us the Knowles question, man. We're ready for that. Yeah. We're going to wrap this thing up here in about 5 minutes. So if you have any other questions, we would love to answer them. While we're kind of going, again, I say Clemson, Florida State. I'm going to say North Carolina, and I'm going to say Miami. Those are my top 4. No conferences this year, Mike. So, I think those are the top 4. Who do you have in your top 4?
I think it's I'll put Florida State 1, Clemson 2. Not to say that I don't think Clemson can win the conference. I obviously think they do. I'm not a Dabo doubter. People doubt Dabo. I'm not that guy. I have never been that guy. I won't be that guy. I think he made a really good change at OC. I just think Florida State has the least amount of questions. So I think Florida State, then Clemson. It's kind of 1A, 1B there. And then I actually like NC State. Armstrong, Robert Anae is the OC, talent returning, both sides of the football. I think NC State's going to be pretty good. I actually like Pittsburgh. I talked about them as kind of like that sleeper team earlier. I do think they're one of the 4 best teams in the ACC. Really good defense returning. They have some questions on offense, but I think if Jurkovec returns to the form that we saw a couple of years back, I think that Pittsburgh will be a lot better than people think they will. I do think Miami takes a step forward. I don't think Miami will be as good as Carolina, though. So I think Carolina is in that, like, I think they're in that conversation and in that, like, that 3 to 5 range in the ACC. They just feel like an 8-4 team to me, Paul. Like, it feels like their offense will be really good, and it feels like their defense will be maybe a little bit better, but maybe not all the way there. And I think they're that 8-4, maybe 9-3 type team.
Okay. That's fair. I just really believe I'm buying. I am 100% buying North Carolina. Let me see. Packer said they play against Miami and Clemson, but not FSU this year. So I mean, you know, if you beat Miami or Clemson, you don't have to beat both, but if you beat Miami or Clemson, then you are firmly in position to be talking about being that number 2 team. And then it just comes down to what does Florida State do, and you have no control over that. You just kind of have to win the games that you have in front of you.
And the one thing I'll say too is, like, we're talking about the teams that have kind of stepped up, right? The teams that we think can step up, but maybe a team that's getting a little too much love that I think, and Paul, maybe the way I kind of talked about right there made you think that like Carolina's that team for me, but it's not. I actually think Carolina is like in that conversation. I think Louisville is probably the team that's getting a little too much hype that I look at, and you have Jeff Brom coming in. Everybody loves Jeff Brom for what he did at Purdue, and he had kind of a mediocre record at Purdue, but it's Purdue, so he turned the program around. I'm not gonna take anything away from that, but you come in and you have Jack Plummer as your quarterback, who was your quarterback at Purdue. You replaced him with Aiden O'Connell. He transferred out to Cal, and he was fine at Cal last year, but now he's coming back and like rejoining you at Louisville, and we're just supposed to assume that everything's fine at quarterback for Louisville, and I'm just not sure that's necessarily going to be the case. They lose some talent in the wide receiver room. They lose some talent defensively. There are just more questions around Louisville, but everybody loves Jeff Brom, and I get it, but that doesn't mean you're going to be good right away. Everybody loves Mario Cristobal too. Miami sucked last year. Everybody seems to like Brent Pry. Virginia Tech sucked last year. Just because you're a nice guy and you're good with the media, Mac Brown has underachieved in North Carolina. Nice guy. Everybody loves him. So I just think Louisville is probably a year or two away from being like the third best team in the ACC. I think they'll be fine. I think they'll make a bowl game, maybe go 7-5. I don't think they're like a 9-3 type team or something like that. I think Carolina's got the higher ceiling. NC State. We talked about Pittsburgh. I'm higher on Pittsburgh than I am Louisville. Those types of teams kind of resonate more with me as those teams that can kind of step up versus like a Louisville or even like a Wake Forest that's very well coached but lost. I mean, you'd lose Sam Hartman. They're high on Mitch Griffiths. They think he'll be really good, but he's not going to be like as good as Sam Hartman was, like a fifth-year senior quarterback, right? So there's going to be some regression there, I think, for Wake Forest as well.
Kareem, we kind of addressed this one earlier in the show. Yes, we both believe that Florida State can be like they were in 2013 and 2014. They've got that, y'all. That's a talented team. They have talent.
Really good team.
Yeah.
Really good team. Are they Georgia good? No.
No.
I don't think they're going to win a national championship, but I think they could make a playoff, certainly. And I think they could be in the mix. Yeah, I mean, I think they're in that tier of teams in like the top 5 or 6 in the country that could make a run at a national championship game. But I think they're a clear step behind a team like Georgia.
Yeah. Jaron, Daddy Jim says no. That's all I'll say about that, my man. Mike, tell the people where they can find you. Where do they get more great coverage from the ACC and all over the nation? Because you're doing everything at Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, at Mike McDaniel, SI.com.
I am the host of The Drive on ESPN Blacksburg. You can hear the show Monday through Friday from 4 until 6. We do stream on our website, espnblacksburg.com. We also have the ESPN Blacksburg app. Feel free to download it. Give the show a couple of tries before you tell us that it's horrible, because it takes a little while to get used to kind of the tomfoolery that we do. But we do talk a lot of Hokies. We do talk a lot of ACC. And as we get closer to fall camp, we'll get it ramped up even more. Mike, thanks for doing this with us today, man. I appreciate it. It's been fun. And thanks to Mark for letting us take over the Voice of College Football page and banter with you all that have tuned in today.
Yeah, it was solid. Good time.
Thanks, Mike. Talk to you real soon.
Thanks.